Are you sitting on a story that you just have to tell? Well, I am talking with Jess Taylor, the editor I worked with on all three of my books, about what makes compelling writing and why people will be drawn to your unique voice. Jess is one of the smartest and funniest people that I know. He has lived all over the world working with some of the greatest storytellers, and he has some pretty fantastic stories of his own, as you'll see. After graduating from Harvard and then Columbia with a view of working in academia, he soon discovered that it was more fun reading manuscripts for big studios and agencies, and then working with writers was even more rewarding. So for 10 years, he worked as a literary agent representing writers for publishing and film and TV at Curtis Brown in New York and then Endeavour in LA. And Jess worked very closely with clients to develop and sell many great books and some film adaptations, including two of my favourites, What's Eating Gilbert Grape and Sideways. Fine-tuning stories is Jess's superpower. So he transitioned into developmental editing, collaborating with novelists and screenwriters and journalists from Nicole Galland to Nancy Stout, Cyrus Copeland, and Greg Hurwitz. It was actually Greg who suggested that I consult with Jess. Back in 2013, he introduced us when I was writing The Blender Girl, and we have been working together ever since, including working on the show notes for every episode of this podcast. Jess just makes me a better writer, and the work is so much more fun when you get to do it with him. So if you are a writer, I am so excited for you to hear what he has to say about crafting narrative and developing plot and character and relishing language and making the writing process entertaining so that you enjoy living in your own stories. And if you're not a writer, I think you'll really enjoy his insights about why we love reading books and watching movies so much. So, I'm so excited. Let's dive in and get the skinny from Jess Taylor. Oh, Jess, this is fun. We get to gab with other people listening for once, as opposed to the privacy of our sessions every week. I'm excited to talk to you about story. So, were you always in love with books and reading? Where did that start for you?
Age 6, I think. It started when I broke my leg and was laid up for months, and there was nothing to do but read and get into stories.
And so what did you learn from that?
From that experience, I think what I learned at age 6 really was just you always have to be prepared to make your own way as far as finding uses of your time and keeping yourself entertained and not getting bored. You have to be pretty resourceful when it comes to keeping yourself engaged. Because for, 4 months when I was 6 years old, there was no going out and playing.
And all the other kids were learning all the sports. That's when you learn all the sports. And you were holed up with a cast and you're completely incapacitated. So you were immersing yourself in the worlds of other people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it was then that I discovered that what people are able to imagine is every bit as vast as what we can find outside in the world, maybe more vast. And at age 6, when you get into a story, what you really want to do is believe. Right.
Yeah.
And you don't want to make believe. Make believe is for little kids, and you're 6. You're a grown up. It's not for, you don't want fairy tales and nonsense like that. And so you look for stories that you can actually believe, you can buy into. And so at that age, I started to develop this idea that coming up with something that people could believe was real was a really significant achievement. Because people are skeptical, they bore easily, and they have really short attention spans. So getting them to believe in some construct, something you've made up, that's a tall order.
And this buying into this and this passion for this was something that you shared with your mum, right? She would read aloud to you and you would stay up late at night immersing yourself in these stories.
Yeah, when I had the broken leg, my mom really got into reading aloud with me. And because I was laid up, I learned to read in the first grade, like you learn to read much later. We would read stories and books together. So after I was over the broken leg, we just continued this. And all the way through grade school, my mom and I were always reading something aloud. Yeah. And very often we would end up, when I was in third grade, staying up till 3 a.m. to finish a book because we were both dying to see how it was going to come out. And having a mom who would get as, involved in stories as I did was just fantastic. I mean, my mom would be reading a story with me and she'd be there in tears, reading some.
Oh, tell me one of your favorite books from that time.
One that was super memorable then for me was a book by Paul Gallico. I think it was called The Man Who Was Magic. And it was just this brilliant story of a magician who had to find this kid who was actually the heir to like the throne of a kingdom. And it was really moving. Everybody loved The Island of the Blue Dolphins by Scott Odell, a great book. And there was the movie, of course. And, at that age in the 1960s, when you read the book and you saw the movie, it was still a thing. That still felt like you were right at the cutting edge. Of course, Charlotte's Web, like.
Yes. Oh, yeah. We all read that with our parents.
Stuart Little. And then when I was in third or fourth grade, my sister introduced my mom and me to the Roald Dahl books, James and the Giant.
Oh, I love those books.
And Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yes.
And those were really a game changer because I tapped into this idea that I hadn't been exposed to before, that it was okay for kids to be shitty. Right?
It was so irreverent.
Yeah. Well, and especially toward adults, right? But also, I mean, James and the Giant Peach was very reverent toward adults, whereas Charlie the Chocolate Factory was very reverent toward other kids. The other kids were just horrible, but they were so wonderfully entertainingly horrible, right? And that I think was a great breakthrough for me, because that's where I realized, stories are not about role models.
Yeah. Not necessarily. Yeah. And it's like acting. You can get away with things in stories that you can't in real life. So you can completely live outside the bounds from which you were, born or bred into or whatever. So books then turned into a love of movies.
Yeah, that took a little while to happen, just because I lived in a very small town. There was one movie theater. It ran a movie for a couple of weeks. This was in the days when we still had double features, right?
Yeah.
It was also the days when movies came back. The Sound of Music came back every year. Gone with the Wind came back every couple of years, right? But the movie thing really took off for me when I was 15, I think, and I got a job as projectionist at the only revival house in the town, which showed its old movie only twice a week, Friday and Saturday nights. And so Friday night, I'd just see this movie I'd never seen before, Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, The Inn of the Sixth Happiness, some classic movie that, because I was 15, I'd never seen, right? And so I'd see it Friday, and then I'd show it again to the audience on Saturday. But that night, I would just watch it and sort of think about how it put its story together. And that was a real revelation, because I began to realize that stories are put together in a way that is so much more complicated than it looks from the front, I mean, particularly a movie, which has to tell a story so much bigger than you can fit into 100 minutes, right? A movie is crafted as much by omission as by inclusion. And the art very much is, what do you leave out, and then how do you juxtapose this and this to make them infer all that part that we omitted, right? And what movies also do, it took me years afterward to start to really figure this out, but what great acting is putting point of view from narrative and prose into something audiovisual, right? You watch Ingrid Bergman, you never are wondering how she feels, because she can put it into the sound and the image. You watch Bette Davis, you're always wondering what she's up to, because she probably doesn't put it forward. She's up to something and you don't know what, and the fun is figuring it out. That's exactly what point of view is in a novel, right? But point of view in a novel has to do it in an entirely different way, right? But a lot of my interest in how stories get told in prose really came out of movies, right? And just thinking about, like, how would you have written that down, right? How would somebody have written this role for that actor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, what I learned later is they didn't.
Yeah. I mean, I
They
often
knew
read
what
a
to do,
screenplay
right? Yeah.
after I've seen a movie, or read the screenplay before I've seen the movie, and then you compare what's not on the page. It's
Yeah.
a really beautiful exercise. Tell me about what working in politics and being around really politically engaged people taught you as a teenager about crafting story and controlling narrative.
Mm. Well, when I got into politics, first it was Nixon and it was Watergate. And that was a phenomenal thing to watch as a kid, ages 12 to 14, because, of course, it was something unprecedented in America that the president would be forced to resign or face being impeached. And what really made it remarkable, and I think pertinent to now, is what really happened to Nixon is public opinion turned against him. And as soon as it was clear that public opinion wanted rid of him, the Congress turned against him like rats off a sinking ship, right? And we may see that again, right?
We can only hope.
What happened, of course, in terms that we would use today, is Nixon failed to control the narrative,
Yeah.
right? But at the time, no one even thought in those terms. Interesting enough, when I was working for Leon Panetta's first campaign for Congress, which was only 4 years after Nixon's reelection, 76, so 2 years after he resigned, it was very much about the narrative, though I don't think anybody used the word at the time. And in that particular campaign, it was pretty simple. He had a great story. His opponent, a 7-term Republican, had no story at all. The guy was just a 7-term Republican incumbent, right? Whereas Panetta had been an outspoken opponent of the administration's neglect of civil rights law. He'd quit his job to do that. He made himself visible with what was already a really good story, right? And then, of course, he was just a better character than the other guy, right? As we just saw with the New York City mayor's race.
Yeah.
I mean, Mamdani didn't win simply because he had a better story, right? But I can say Andrew Cuomo lost because he had a really crappy story.
Right. Yes. And often when you know a lot about somebody, that works against you.
Oh, well, and unfortunately, he's been utterly miscast as himself. He was right for the role when he was 43, right? But they need to do a new production and replace him.
Oh God, we could do a whole podcast about that.
He's Patty Lou as.
So then you decide to go to Harvard on a whim.
On a whim, yeah.
As an archaeology major of all things, but then English pulls you back in and the love of language. So tell me about what being in that institution, in an intellectual environment and rather progressive environment, what did that teach you about story?
Well, what it primarily taught me, which was a real shock, and it was a shock I had to get twice to be convinced of it, first in college and then in graduate school, is in the academic establishment in literature, no one has any interest in story at all. They're interested in things that are derivatives of narrative, and they talk about narratology and narratizing, and they use all these words that begin with NARR, but talking about making inquiry into story, it's not done, and I think it's considered unworthy of an academic undertaking, which...
Because it's too much fun?
I think it's because it's too much fun, and because it's unserious. Or so they think. And it's also because at a certain period in the formation of liberal arts education, right, and a liberal education with the trivium and the quadrivium, and it was all in Latin and all that stuff, One studied literature to learn the classics because the ancients were superior to us. And one studied literature to learn philosophical things and ask the great questions. But it wasn't for stories. And then once public education came along, English teachers had to convince legislatures and others to pay them. Well, they're not going to pay to talk about stories. So they had to cook up this idea. There was these things called themes. No one cares about themes, right? I mean, did you ever read a book for the themes? Like, no, of course not.
But you bring up an interesting point, because you really only talk about this if you're writing a review, you're writing a school paper, you're writing a college thesis. Otherwise, you just talk about what moved you.
Well, and you know, the process whereby a story assembles itself. I mean, you watch a lot of movies, you know, you've made movies, you know. Movies are made, you can look at movies in two ways. They're made by this incredible collective of people, or in some mystical way through these people, they make themselves. The force of the story renders the movie. And where we really see that is when the movie turns out bad, right? It's because the story just didn't have the oomph, didn't have the chops, right? Every good story, if it has a life to it, it develops a will. You know, there's an invisible hand phenomenon, right? Story. Well, you've written narrative work. You know, at a certain point, your job is to get out of the way because it has this internal drive.
Oh, right? But that's so much easier said than done, isn't it?
Oh, well, you can cultivate it. You can nurture it. There's a lot that you can't make it happen, but you learn to recognize the components, the ingredients of that. Characters who seem to be real characters you can relate to, that's essential, right? Certain ways of capturing places, atmospheres, relationships to time, you know, but it's also all kinds of things that are structural. I can't call her a mentor, but a woman I learned a lot from was the woman who co-created Dynasty, Esther Shapiro. And Esther and I used to talk periodically when she would come to New York to talk books with agents. And I'd tell her about a book. And her first question was always the same. How's the incidentation? Well, of course, I'd go, well, it's fabulous, Esther. I mean, of course, why would I be telling you about a book that didn't have? I had no idea what she was talking about. But over several conversations with her, I realized she's asking, how is the story delivered in a system or set of incidents? Because that's how nighttime TV worked, right? The story had to be able to break out in incidents. This thing that she taught me about incidentation is invaluable, right? And that's a really big component too of getting your story to the point that all of a sudden it starts to turn its own wheels and develop its own energies and push and pull and prod and right. Because when the incidents have started to form their own floor plan, if you will, right? Something just happens. It's a structure, and structure is one of the worst words we can use because we always talk about structure in stories. Structure is static. This thing we mean is dynamic. It's in motion, right? And that incidentation fuels that a lot, right? So you can't make it happen, but there's all kinds of ways to sort of hedge your bet with it a bit.
Yeah, so this critical eye that you put on work as a reader, how did that develop for you? So you're in New York, or you're in Boston, and then you're in New York, and you get a job as a reader. Tell me about what just reading, and putting that eye, knowing that you had to report back as opposed to just reading for pure enjoyment.
Yeah, I read first.
How did that lens change?
I read first for one of the big studios with its literary office in New York, which would get manuscripts of books that either had just sold or were selling. Usually they were sneaked out from somebody. Then I read for a huge agency that was looking to be active in packaging because packaging was just taking off. This was the 80s. And my initial job was just write a report. Here's the story. Here's how I think it might work or might not work as a movie. And I had a real liability there because I can't read a novel that works and not see a movie in it somehow, right? I mean, because if the story's good, it can be a movie. So I got sort of switched into something different where my bosses would give me books that other people had already read and covered. And my job was to rewrite their coverage for specific clients. We want this to work for that director. We want this to work for that production company. And you know what their taste is. Skew it or jigger it all to fit them, which was really fun because to an extent, it was kind of like adapting the story, but it was also just plain old distorting it, right? It was taking this story and making it different in a way that I, with very little experience, felt would appeal to so-and-so. And of course, I didn't feel in any way remorseful about this because if it worked, this author was going to get a bunch of money, right? And if they didn't want the money, they always could say no. Right? And it's not like anybody was going to follow my plan anyway.
But they did, and they did a lot.
Well,
so
that came later when I became an agent.
Yeah.
Right?
So take me inside that transition from reader to agent. What's that? It has to be me moment.
So I went to grad school at Columbia, once again thinking I would be able to do narrative studies, like real study of how stories work. And I got my master's and I started my PhD and I realized I'm not going to be an academic. There's no way. So I quit a year into my PhD, and within a short time, a couple of agents asked me to join them in a new agency. And we were all about turning playwrights into screenwriters and developing careers for them in that. And that was really fun. But I don't know much about the theater. And so I quickly became the book person, and that worked out pretty well. And within a few months of the time I joined them, they were bought by a very large agency that was entirely publishing focused, a book agency. So it was the perfect fit for me. And there too, I kind of got into the distortion business very quickly. I was developing and editing work with some of our clients. I mean, most notably, Peter Hedges' What's Eating Gilbert Grape was the first thing I got to edit chapter by chapter all the way through.
Oh, wow. Oh, my goodness. It's so great.
The dreamiest experience imaginable. Everything went wonderfully. Everybody involved was terrific. And when I watched the movie at a Paramount screening room in New York, I just sat there with tears in my eyes because it was like, it's the story that Peter always envisioned. It's here, right? You know. But there, at the agency, my job became in part a matter of taking books that hadn't sold, working with the writer to turn them into something we would then succeed in selling, or taking projects that were very undeveloped and just developing them enough to sell. And this worked out pretty well. Also, because it was the early 90s, publishing had been taken over by all the conglomerates. And so we were just selling stuff like mad. You know, we could sell everything. And so in those days, I remember thinking, I just don't know why everybody doesn't do this. It's so easy to sell books. But that was a very short-lived period. And for the 30 years since I started, it's just gotten harder and harder and harder.
Yeah, I mean, there's just look, as we know, the landscape just changes and changes and changes, and obviously with streaming and AI, and you know, it's just changed so much since that time. That time at Curtis Brown, I mean, that was the same time as Diana Gabaldon and that era. And tell me what you learnt about timing, you know, and what the market is offering, and whether something's going to fly or not fly.
Yeah, Peter Hedges' book to me was a great timing story in a way, right? When What's Eating Gilbert Grape was really done, the galleys were in hand, the publisher was going to be publishing it in a few months. We followed our plan, which was to send it to directors only, and we sent it to 5. All 5 really admired the book. 4 of them passed. 1 kind of considered it. And then we just said, we weren't going to go any further. We weren't just going to be out there flogging it. We felt like now's not the right time. We'll be there later. What ended up happening is Lasse Hallström discovered it on his own because a friend of his was the Swedish publisher who bought it. And that made the whole thing happen. The timing will somehow happen if it's going to. And while you can strategize, you don't have a lot of control. Diana Gabaldon's a perfect example. We loved her books. all of my colleagues were 100% behind her. She sold all over the world. We in the film department simply couldn't get those books lined up for a movie because they're not a movie. They're huge. They're epic, right?
Yeah.
It really took until streaming was a reality for those books to happen on the screen. And of course, the series is fabulous. It's beautiful in every way, every
Oh, I
aspect.
love Outlander. Are you kidding me? I'm a super fan.
The Outlander series is a phenomenal success, the phenomenon, which simply couldn't have happened as a 2-hour movie, right?
Yeah.
And I wasn't ever involved in any things. Well, okay, yeah, actually, there's the new series called Dark Winds based on Tony Hillerman.
Yeah.
Robert Redford had those forever. They made a couple of them, but they never really worked because those books are really much more like a series. They are a series of books. They're much more like a series than like a 2-hour production, right? And actually what a series is has undergone such an incredible transformation in the past 25 years.
Yeah.
Right. All kinds of books it would never have occurred to us to try to sell for a series in the 90s are natural series material now.
Yeah. Tell me what you learned being in LA as opposed to New York. So you go out and you start working with Endeavor. What did you learn there about crafting story in a different, or selling stories in a different environment?
Well, I think the most important thing I learned at Endeavor, where I had great colleagues whom I admired a lot, is I was just not a very good agent. And the reason I was not a very good agent was a good agent can sell the material regardless of his opinion of the material. And I am way too vain about my own taste. I can only sell what I love myself. I can sell a script or a book if I want to read the book or see the movie myself. I want to recommend it to my friends, and I just wasn't good at that.
So is that how you felt about Sideways?
Yeah, Sideways, I loved the story completely, and I knew right away, that Sideways would make a terrific movie. I also knew right away there was only one person in the whole industry who could get it made, but fortunately he was a client of Endeavor and a terrific, amazing, wonderful person, Alexander Payne.
Yeah.
And he and I had a good connection, and I could give him the book and know he would read it, and so that was a wonderful little piece of serendipity too, right? I got the book, and if I hadn't known Payne, there wouldn't have been anybody to give it to, right? And I like Alexander's movies consistently. I think they're great, but I still think Sideways is one of his best.
Oh, it's glorious.
It's a wonderful
glorious
movie. Right. As far as developing stories, one of the things I think the Hollywood agents are very smart about is they largely don't do that. They attach people to do that. When an agent at an agency like Endeavor or, William Morris Endeavor now, CAA, agencies of that scope and that stature, when they have, say, a team of writers who have a really great story in their heads, but it needs some development, the agent doesn't muck around in it. The agent says, the producer to work on this with you is so-and-so. I'm setting up a meeting for you with her, because the agent's not going to be part of that creative team, right? It doesn't make sense for the agent to, but also the agents don't have the time. And frankly, most of the agents don't particularly have the skill set, right? I mean, being an agent is a particular combination of talents, right? And
and your colleagues all along the way, I know we've spoken about this, didn't really understand your approach, that you were really working as an editor with your clients to help craft their books and bring their vision to life in a way that other agents, were not doing. And so take me inside the "it does not have to be me" moment where you're like, I'm not an agent. I don't want to be an agent anymore. And you found your vocation, so to speak, as a personal editor.
Yeah, and I just preface it. I think many of my colleagues did understand it. They just didn't agree with it, right?
Okay, important distinction.
Yeah. for different reasons. And for one thing, it's for agents, it's not cost effective, right? Agents have to maximize the utility of every single minute, and development is not a way to do it. So the it has to be me moment probably came when I'd taken my first vacation from Endeavor, like a real trip. One of the things I love at Endeavor is they obligate you to take vacation. You must take vacation and you must go away. You cannot just sit on your sofa for the 3 weeks of your vacation. So I was in Thailand, and I'd had the great luck to meet a whole bunch of Thai people, particularly a family. And it was a guy, his grandmother, and his aunt. He was a former boxer, recently out of the military. And they were very poor. And he and I were making an offering one day at a temple. And I was a little unnerved by it because we're going to burn incense and put down gold leaf and a flower. And I'm like, and he's like, what's up? And I go, well, I feel odd because I don't understand it. I don't know what it means. And he goes, he just laughs at me. He goes, it doesn't mean anything. You just do it. And later that day, we're driving, and he's driving, and he looks at me and he goes, the problem with you is you think too much. And I go, yeah, I've been told that before. That's not news. And he goes, but what I mean is you think you have to understand things to do them. And that's not how it works. You understand things by doing them. That was a big change for me, because I'd always been the kind of person who would get lost in the prep rather than just jump in and do, right? And just get way over invested in sharpening my pencils. I'm going to be ready to do that when. And that carried over for me in a couple of ways. First off, I quit my job as an agent, and in a short time, not right away, really invested myself in editing and developing books and stories. And it's like, am I a pro? I'm half baked, but got to do, as they say in Brazil, begin by beginning, right? Mm-hmm. But equally, that's actually one of the precepts I work by with writing, with stories, with the elaborating of them. You can't understand your story fully before you write it. You have to start writing it in order to understand it. Yeah. I learned that actually in translation from Portuguese to English. The best way to understand a book is to translate it into another language, right? Mm. It's an incredible amount of work, but it's so worth it, because you come out, every time I've translated a book, I come out feeling like I understand this book better than the author does. Yeah. But you gain understanding by getting your hands into the mix and the mess and all that. And that weird. I was 39 years old before I learned that. And that kind of put me over a certain crest.
Yeah. And Greg was your first client in that iteration of your career, who you had met years before. Greg Hurwitz. Love him.
Greg Hurwitz came to me when he was 24. He was not quite just out of college. He was just out of Oxford, where he'd gotten a master's in psychology and Shakespeare.
Sounds like Greg.
Yep. And he'd been a client as an agent when I was an agent. And then as soon as I'd quit, he was the first one to get in touch and say, hey, I've written this new book. Would you edit it? And he and I did it over a summer. I was East Coast. He was West Coast. So it was a whole lot of FedEx, because this is like before there were attachments.
Yeah.
And I learned a great deal from Greg. More than I can cite here. But the great moment came with Greg when he and I had done 9 books together. And it was clear he just didn't need me anymore. And that was just like the greatest feeling of success. And the way he was able to get to that is we never edited any book the way we had edited the previous, because every time we did a new book, he had already learned everything that we did in the previous book, and he kneaded it into his system. So there was never just sort of like repeat, it's like you weren't covering the same stuff again and again. And not only does that save a lot of tedium, but even better, it lets you start getting to more advanced, complicated, sophisticated stuff, which before I worked with him, I didn't really know because I didn't have that kind of continuity with any one writer. I mean, he's still the writer I've done the most books with.
Yeah. Everybody has a book in them. How do you feel about that statement?
Oh, yeah. Everybody has a book in them. And I would back one step back really quickly and say, though, for some people, it's not a book. For some people, it's a movie. For some people, it's a monologue. For some people, it's a 247-line poem that may or may not rhyme. But everybody has a story. Everybody is a story. And everybody can have, I think everybody can have an incredibly rich experience seeing what that story is, how they want to tell it, what the variations are. If it's a story that comes out of their own life, they can have an incredibly great time figuring out just what is their recollection of what occurred. If it's a story that they've invented, they can have an incredibly great time just giving themselves whatever it is, 12, 14, 18 months, just to live in their imagination for 16 or 20 hours a week, right? And everybody, I believe, can derive this benefit regardless of the success of the project, because the reason to create a book or a story is to do it. It's not to make a bestseller list. I mean, if you do, that's nice. And if you do, and you do it with me, that's even nicer, because then right.
And it'll be a whole lot more fun.
Well, in the process of creation of a book isn't always fun, but it's always a thrill. It's always a wonderful challenge. And it's an incredibly big learning experience.
Yeah. We can certainly attest to that, separately and together, for sure. So for somebody that hasn't, well, we've all written something. We've all written an email. We've all written a letter. We've written a card, and so forth. But in terms of potentially deciding it has to be me to write something that would then be put out for others to read in a more public way, what would your advice be on where to start? For someone going, oh, I've always wanted to write a book, or I've always wanted to write a story or a screenplay or something, a blog post even, let's say, or start a Substack. But, oh gosh, I don't know if anyone's going to read it, or even if I have any talent. That's what people think. So are there resources that you would suggest, or books about it that you like that you could recommend?
Most of the books that I think are useful are actually more oriented towards screenwriting. People like Sid Field and others, but they're talking about story and they're talking about structure, and they have application to narrative books, be they fiction or nonfiction. David Lodge, once a client in the Curtis Brown days, his art of fiction is very useful. It's more thinky and philosophical. It's not quite instructional. But as far as just, you think you want to give this a try, you want to take a crack. First, you want to select whatever medium for the moment to get started is comfortable for you. For some people, it's writing on a legal pad. For some people, it's writing on a keyboard. For some people, it's talking. If you're going to talk it, and I advocate this a lot, my writing has changed dramatically in the last 8 years because I've learned to talk my first draft, it's a zero draft. It's not a first draft, but it's a very, very rough draft.
Oh, tell me about the zero draft.
Yeah. Okay. So When I have to write something, and I say have to because I only write when I have to. Um, one of my favorite clients of all time is a finance writer. He is not a native speaker of English. He is super fluent in English, but he does not write publication quality English. So I co-write the book we're working on with him. And we want this book to be so short and really simple. 200 pages long, read it in a weekend, very clear. Anybody with a 10th grade education can read it. Well, we had been writing in this, the first part of it, which is the first third, had blown up to 180 pages. His suggestion was, let's just throw that away. I said, let me see if I can whittle it down. Okay. I threw out the 180 pages. I got out my voice recorder, my voice memo recorder in my phone, and I took a walk. And in 28 minutes, I just told the voice recorder the entire story of those 180 pages. It worked out in transcription to, I can't remember how many pages. It was like 32 pages. And that was my zero draft. It was not stream of consciousness, but it was somewhere between stream of consciousness and actual prose. And in 3 days, I turned it into an 84-page draft, which blew everybody's socks off because it was the same story as before, only just so much tighter and better, right? When I need to write something truly from scratch and it's more narrative than that, that is a narrative book, more narrative than that, it's very important to be walking. You have to be in motion, right? I'll walk around my garden here, or I'll walk around the block, and I'll just talk through whatever. Here's my take on that chapter. Throw the transcription in. What's so great about talking is you can't get fancy. You keep yourself honest when you're talking. You don't get carried away being writerly. We talk pretty honestly. We won't distort our own voices, right? So that's a really great way to get your zero draft in hand. And it enables you to go, okay, well, that actually told the story. So I have now the story here as an entirety, as a unit, kind of got that put to bed. And the voice recording devices in our phones now, they automatically transcribe. You don't even have to send it to Otter or something like that, right? So that's the way I advocate for almost everybody. Not everybody's so comfortable talking, so keyboard or writing on a legal pad, but basically just take and as quickly as you can and as concisely as you can, write out your story or your argument or your course of instruction as you understand it right now. Just boom, 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 boom. Write it. Don't even read it. You've put it down. The act of writing it down or speaking it will have embedded it in your head. But that's your zero draft that you want to work with. If you want to test drive it a little, and I'm all for this, but not everybody's ready for it, tell it to a suitable audience. Choose one friend. Take your friend out for coffee or a beer. Tell them the story. See how they react. See if a movie unspools in their head as you're telling it to them. Or even better, tell it to a group of people. Say how they react. It takes a lot of courage. But there's something about this too that's really valuable, which is you're telling the story to your friends or your acquaintances or your in-laws or wherever it is. You'd be a really unusual person if you can somehow not be yourself as you're telling it to. You're going to know, is that story true to you, right? The match between story and storyteller is pretty essential, right? When you're going to devote all these months, maybe a year, maybe more, to the creation of a story, you got to have that kind of affinity with it for sure. That's how you can test your story. Then you want to start getting into questions like, narrative mechanics. If you're going to write it as a book, start getting into questions as basic as, how am I going to narrate this? Is it going to be omniscient with multiple points of view, omniscient with only one point of view? Is it going to be a first-person narrator? Is it going to be multiple first-person narrators? These questions are so vital, and you may have to experiment to find out what's going to work, don't make that decision arbitrarily. Don't just sort of go, well, this seems right. Because once you get far into that and committed to that, and it turns out it doesn't work, it's really hard to fix. I mean, when you've written an entire novel first person and you go, oh, now I see why that is no good. And you created a lot of work for yourself.
Yeah, I want to ask you about voice. Like finding the voice of the story.
Well, this, of course, is part of the whole question about how you want to narrate it. If you're going to have a narrator who isn't first person, some kind of awareness, consciousness being who isn't identified in the story, a third person semi-omniscient narrator, that voice is going to have some relationship to you probably, right? But not necessarily. I mean, after all, if it's a novel set in the 17th century in China, it's probably not going to sound a lot like you. That voice you just have to start experimenting with a lot and see what starts to sound right. Inevitably, if you're into the story, that voice will start to sound like somebody and not necessarily like you. That narrator will have a personality. That narrator will become a character, even though that narrator's never identified and never steps into the frame. If you're going to use points of view of your characters, which you almost certainly are in that kind of narration, then their voices are going to step in, and you get to experiment with how they talk and then how it sounds inside their heads, right? One of the many ways I like to experiment with that is I don't think about casting necessarily in terms of, oh, that actor, right? But I do picture it as performed or filmed, and I go, well, how does that person sound?
Yeah.
This imagine, because they'll start. They don't just have the voice, this voice. Literally, they have the voice that we're talking about, the voice in terms of how they arrange a sentence, right? Do they talk with semicolons or whatever, right?
You're a high fact finder, high information gatherer. You do a lot of research as a person. When you and I are speaking, I'll say something, oh, wait a second, and you'll start looking it up. Yeah. And you're really getting in the weeds with every bit of information that you're taking in, you're in touch with, you're absorbing. So as an editor, on a personal level, when you're working with someone, you're always doing your own research, as the author's doing theirs. You just don't take somebody's word for it. That's one of the things I love about you.
Oh, yeah. I don't fact check per se, but when something sounds weird, I go, let me check that out. Right. And of course, this has become weirdly not easier, but more difficult in the internet age, because the internet is such a vast cesspool of disinformation.
Yes.
Right. And I mean, a ChatGPT will just lie to your face.
Jeez, don't even get me started. Yeah.
But, yeah, I do that. And I really do that mainly because I just want to find out more stuff, right? And my primary motivator for that sort of, go look it up is I go, well, I bet you there's something even cooler connected to that.
Yeah.
Right? I didn't know that at the Battle of such and such, Napoleon was wearing double knit hose. And you always find something more, right? I mean, when you start doing that kind of research.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, here's one that I love. Okay. A client is working on this amazing, wonderful, rich novel that an agent you and I both know well has taken on. 1840 London. And it concerns the earliest days of what become private investigators. And it's rich with the stories of these guys who have come back from, in fact, the Napoleonic Wars and are setting themselves up in this trade. And it's incredibly fabulously researched and detailed. And I was so fascinated, I went and dug into it. Turns out she has made the entire thing up. It's all an invention. And it's so convincing that you're sure, right? And I mean, it blew me away because it just increased my admiration for this book so vastly, because I'm like, my God, this is the most incredible construct. And I never doubted for a minute that this is where private investigators came from, right?
Yeah.
It's all entirely her invention.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I want to ask you about that. Like we're talking about, using our experiences, creativity, imaginings, and then casting it in your mind and thinking about how somebody would talk and walk and move. And what are your suggestions for expanding your lexicon, so to speak, or the words that you typically use in order to construct a world that is not something that you've inhabited, you are imagining or you're fascinated with?
Yeah. Yeah. Funny enough, I did have a conversation about this just this morning with ChatGPT, which confirmed something I've been told for ages. English has twice the vocabulary, just in sheer number of words, of any other language, right? But a lot of that's fluff. It's archaic words we never use, like avasty, or it's technical words that aren't really in common use. But we do have 16 words for every action and 12 for every. It drives foreign speakers crazy. Like, why do you have so many words for the same thing, right? So the first thing is, you've got the vocabulary. Just think about it. Does your character walk across the room? Does he stroll across the room? Does he glide across the room? Does he sashay or mince across the room? Does he
we like a bit of mincing.
Yeah. We have so many words for walk, right? Does he dash across the street? Does he dart across the street? Does he race across the street? You've got it already. Just start looking for it that way, right? And don't feel like you're cheating if you use that synonym for button in your Microsoft Word and the thesaurus function of things,
Oh, please. You and I have used that many times together.
Words, there'll be something, and it'll very often be not really a synonym, but kind of vaguely related and better, kind of metaphoric, kind of not quite spot on. But more than anything, you just got to read. And you got to read writing that is good enough that people use their vocabularies. And if you're writing fiction, you're writing narrative nonfiction, just read voluminously in whatever relates to your topic or topics or your setting or your place or whatever, right? If you're writing a novel that takes place in Arkansas in the 1950s, go find those books written in Arkansas in the 1950s. They're gonna have a vocabulary, right? I mean, again, this 1820, just post-Regency English novel, written by a woman who is not English, by the way. She has done this homework, and every 4 or 5 pages, there's a word, and you're like, I've never encountered that word, and yet she used it so well in the context, you can tell what it means, right?
Yeah.
It's like really deft. So, and remember too, your narrator's not you, your characters aren't you. When your characters are using their point of view, not their speech, they're different from how they talk. And so we don't have to be inhibited, right? We don't have to feel embarrassed about using, quote, fancy words, right? Most of us try to dumb down how we talk.
Yeah.
We don't have to do that.
I like to do that. I like to keep everything very conversational. And what's coming up for me as I'm speaking to you, obviously, because we work together every week and have for many years, this notion to just trust your gut and your instincts. That when I write something, it doesn't feel right. It's not right. Getting to a place where it's right, and then just deciding it's right, and then being able to let it go and move on, and not pontificating over and over about something.
When my instinct says that's wrong, I can trust it. But when my instinct says that's right, I may need my medication adjusted.
Oh God, thank you. Well said. Yeah.
Always
well, I mean,
so it's trust Trust your instinct when it goes, get something else. But otherwise, it's trust but verify. When you have an instinct, when your instinct says, when she walks into the kitchen and her mother-in-law is feeding the dog, and she asks, why are you feeding our dog? The mother-in-law is going to do X, right? Okay, come back later and look at it. You're probably going to see exactly the logic of that progression of action and speech, and you go, of course that's why, right? So your instinct is right, but it's not simply instinct. The characters did it, and you knew they would do it, but the logic whereby they're operating isn't clear to you at the moment, right? Your instincts are always going to be ahead of your conscious processing, particularly in story, right? Because stories, if you're involved in story, you're always thinking onward, right? You're always ahead. Or not, I shouldn't say thinking, because that sounds like conscious, right? But, part of what makes stories work for us is that we almost can't avoid anticipating, right?
Yeah. So I want to ask you more about developing character and at the same time letting things unfold. What have you learned about the different? Yeah, I'm just fascinated by this process because it feels like a chicken and the egg thing, like this very convoluted labyrinth of a journey, which we know it is.
Yeah, this is probably the hardest thing for most people to tackle, and it's particularly vexing because, of course, it's what has to be achieved in the first 100 pages of your book or the first 35 pages of your screenplay, right? I mean, the thing we understand from watching well-made movies and reading well-wrought novels is you don't do characterization and then start plot. You don't start plot and then they have to happen at once. But okay, how do you do that, right? Well, part of what we forget with plot is if the action, if the behavior is true to the person, it's illustrating who the person is, right? Character will emerge from what people do for sure. It really is a good thing for a lot of people to create character dossiers or sort of one sheets on your character. Here's what this person's about. I find that's a liability for me and a lot of people because then we somehow deceive ourselves into thinking that because we know that, the book knows that, the reader knows that. It's like, that's on a cheat sheet. We handed that to Diane Keaton before she did the role, but she's got to put that into the movie. It's right. So those can be kind of double-edged sword. This also comes down, I think, to something closely related to incidentation. And I've learned this mostly from memoir and biography. I think all lives, be they lived lives or imagined lives, fictional characters, involve highly concentrated specific scenes that just astonishingly illustrate who a person is. I'm working on a memoir where a woman, she's a young decorator in a big American city. She's invited to do a room in a show house. She says, give me the smallest room in the house. And she does the dog's room. And it pisses off everybody, right? And I'm like, this is who you are. This is so great. This is a featured scene, right? Anybody who doesn't know who this woman is after that scene, it's like, you're not awake, right? Figure out ways to give your character those scenes that illustrate who they are, right? This is what screenwriters, the really good screenwriters, are just so good at, right? A 4-second interaction that shows us who somebody is, right? The other thing that I think most writers are averse to is this is where you get in touch with your inner Rodin. If you visit the Rodin Museum in Paris, and you have, right, there are 7,000 studies for the burghers of Calais. There's only one actual Burgers of Calais, or maybe there are two, I don't know. But he's creating the characters in these studies. You write 16 scenes for that person to figure out who she is, and then you bring in the parts that really reveal her, right? We start in with characters. We think we know them, and we do, but we don't know who they are. We need, I mean, think how long it took you to get to know your producers of this podcast, right? It's a process of successive approximations, right? There's all this stuff that happens, and sketches are a great way to interact with your own characters, right?
Tell me about that.
Well, when we write story and we feel like what we're writing is content, we're doing this job in which we have to be very focused on a set of deliverables. When we just write a scene to see what will happen with this character, we're so much more interacting with that character ourselves, right? Now, the character may not be on his own or her own in the scene or their own, but we're focusing on this character. We're letting this character's point of view drive things and observe things. So we're having a closer interaction with that character now, and we're giving ourselves a chance to get to know that person better, right? And this is invaluable, and it works so well if we're not deeming this content for inclusion in the work. We're doing this for ourselves. It's like if you could you could go up for a drive with your character, you and James Corden singing Adele tunes, right?
That would be my choice.
Yes, but if you could go and take a walk with your character, of course you would.
Yeah.
It also,
writing what interests you.
Well, I'm going to grind that axe a bit more.
Oh, God.
It also is a wonderful way. It's a terrific way of finding out whether your character is real to you.
Yeah.
So you just said something, and I talked over you in my typical way.
No, I love it. It was just bringing up for me writing what you find interesting rather than what you think the market will find interesting or somebody else will find interesting. What actually gets you fired up, and what are you passionate about? What would you want to read? That's what's coming up for me. Is that something is that advice that you would give?
Well, it's a two-part thing for me. We have to write what holds interest for us, and it has to hold interest for us in a way that is sustained, that we're going to want to be living in this for 287, 395 pages, because we're going to ask other people to do that, but we're going to have to give that much commitment to it ourselves. And I am not particularly experienced at that because I don't do that very much. I work on 8 or 10 projects at a time. I put 5 or 6 hours a week into a given project, maybe 10, 12, if it's particularly a matter of focus. So I'm always shifting to another thing that's very, very different. So I never, ever get burnt out. I'm always happy to come back to what I was working on for a while 2 days ago. I believe for most writers, it's invaluable, right, to make sure you're getting 20 hours a week or 18 or 22, whatever's the allotment you can really make use of, but also be working on something else at the same time. If you're really pouring on steam with your novel, be working on, a nonfiction short essay about how you work at the community garden, because those two things, they support each other. One becomes recess for the other.
Yeah, I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
And then this part to me is, I advocate it, but it's not controllable. The process has to be fun. It can't be fun every minute. It can be agonizing. It can be grueling. But if it's just plain not fun, that's going to show through.
Mm.
And a book that is not fun to write, it ain't fun to read. You know, the thrill, the joy, the all these things. It's like athletics in a way, right? Athletics is not nonstop fun. It's work, it's pain, it's all this stuff. But there's joy and satisfaction and entertainment in it. Right? If you're not getting that when you are writing your book, rethink things, try things differently. Because if you really love what you're writing about, you should be able to get that.
Yeah.
Particularly if you have connection with your characters, be they real people or made up people.
Yeah.
You know, I worked 14 years ago on a really, really good biography of a woman who really made the Cuban Revolution happen. And the author's involvement with her subject was just so great that it was just totally sustaining to me, to her. We ended up working on the book on and off over about 5 years. Got it done. Great publisher, great foreword by Alice Walker. And we really rode the connection between this woman in Cuba in the 1950s and 60s and the author, right? And I learned a lot from that, you know, the bond, the tie between person and person across this curious divide of narration.
What's coming up for me as I'm listening to you is what you brought up when we first started talking about your Thailand lesson of you think too much. So, because writing in any medium is about language, which comes from our mind, and that's how we make sense of it, how we communicate with others, when is the right time to move into collaboration with a personal editor such as yourself, where you can get another eye, another perspective on it? And I know that's really how long is a piece of string because it's different for everybody. But in general, when do you think is the right time to go, okay, I want to work with someone to fine tune this?
Yeah, I'd point to 3 moments in a project's evolution. And I could say this with regard to narrative books that are fiction, narrative books that are nonfiction, screenplays as well, things relating to them, like even treatments, and articles, you know, feature articles too, because I've worked on all these things. Right away at the concept stage, when you can turn your concept into a sustained statement like that 0 draft, that's actually a great time to start to talk to somebody. This is what we do when we work on proposals, which are usually for nonfiction. But I can't be particularly helpful to somebody until they have that solid concept picture, right? I mean, I could step in, but then I'm going to be messing their concept around, and the concept is why they're doing it. Then the next point is when they have something that constitutes a first draft, be it rough. Here it is. It's where I've got it for now. I know it can be better, but this is a rough cut. Come with me, look at this rough cut. Then the next point, and I think most writers do better not waiting to this point, when you actually get to what I would call edit-ready text, meaning your content is there, you're not going to be needing to make changes to plot, to structure. It's going to be a matter of literally editing how the whole story is implemented at the level of the line, the paragraph, etc. That I would advocate mostly for established writers who've already done a book or two or have done a lot of journalism, mainly because simply that's not actually the value prop of editing. Come in and do all that cleanup work, right? If you need an editor to do that kind of really text and copy edit, you don't want to be working, you want to just find a copy editor, somebody
Yeah.
who does that on an hourly basis, right? And somebody who will hear your voice and the character's voices and then just really just kind of, and I think if that's what you need, I'd actually run it through an AI first and see what the AI can do.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that. I want to ask you about that in a minute, just because I don't want to forget to ask you what I want to ask you right now, which is, what's your advice about finding the right editor for you? Let's assume we're not looking for a copy editor. We're looking for someone, like what I do with you, which is you really know me. You know my voice now. You know what my intent is. We've got this established relationship. And obviously we had to establish that many years ago, where you absolutely were the right editor for me. But what are your thoughts about that? Like, is it a feeling? How do you know if it's the right fit?
So to find the right developmental editor is what people call it, right? And you're looking for what they call substantive edit, meaning content, not just wording and grammar, all that. The first thing is to talk to everybody you know who writes, see who they know. Look in the acknowledgments of writers you like, see who they might mention. If you have the opportunity, go to things like writers' conferences. Those people will be hanging out. And when you get a chance, if you do get a chance to talk to people like agents and publishing house editors, you can frankly ask them, hey, I'm working on this novel. I want to work with a substantive editor or a developmental editor. Is there anybody you know and would want to recommend? Everybody I've ever worked with successfully has come to me on a referral through somebody who was already a client. I don't avoid getting people who come in over the transom. They just don't really come to me because I don't advertise, right? So
Well, that Pandora's out of the box now, isn't it? What's your criteria for clients? How do you choose who you want to work with?
Oh, well, I have to read a bunch of the work. I always read all the work to make up my mind, but I'm looking for something that's going to grab me in the first 30, 40, 50 pages in one way or another, right? And then when it doesn't, I just keep reading because I'm counting on something to grab me in the next 30 or 40, 50 pages. We go, okay, so the book will start on page 45 because this is where it kicks in, right?
And you do that with everything you read, even if it's just not your jam and you don't think the writing's good, you'll still give it 70 pages?
Get to page 100 and I will email the author and say, this seems not to be the kind of thing I know much about or am the right editor for. So it's your call. I can read the rest and maybe that'll change, or I can just stop. What do you think is right? In fact, this happened a couple of weeks ago. I was reading a novel from a very smart attorney in California, sort of mystical. And the first 100 pages, I was like, this is like a romance novel. I don't really know how to do this. I don't read this. But then I went back to her email and it said, I apologize. I didn't really know how to get through the stuff in the first 85 pages. The plot really starts. So I read on. It was cool. I want to get grabbed, and I've kind of become old-fashioned in a way, like my colleagues were forever. I am looking to hear a voice, and I didn't used to be that way, right? But I've learned that, the old adage is writing can be learned, but it cannot be taught, right? And I think it was Escoffier who said you can learn how to cook, but you must be born knowing how to roast. If you have a voice, there's everything in the world to work with. If you do not have a voice, you may acquire one, but I do not know how to help you do that, right? And so I have to hear a personality there. I have to hear something like that, right? Now, a lot of the people that I do work with are people who literally have a book in them they're probably going to write one book only. And in their case, it's not about a voice, it's they have some remarkable story. Right.
Tell me about that they're probably only going to have one book in them.
Well, for example, one of my favorite clients whom I met some years ago, and she is only able to work sporadically on her book because she has a bunch of kids and does a job. She's a stateless person from Iraq who lives in the Mideast, has bounced around from country to country, had a horrible time during the war and the occupation. She was 23 years old, a mom with a 3-year-old child, and her husband was locked up by the coalition forces, and she had to escape the country. And she had no way to do it because the only thing she had to sell was a car, and the coalition forces took it away. And then she had jewels, but she had to go to the backyard of a cousin's house in Baghdad where she had buried them. And her story is incredible. Or not incredible, but rather astonishing. This is the one book she's going to write, very likely, and has constant movie interest from people, but she has to write enough. And we constantly start it and go back. But it's also, when we began, she was still too close to the experience. So she's going to get back to it. She's getting back to it now, right? But that's a person who's got one book in her. Most memoirs, the person has one book in them. There are plenty of people, though, who write a work of fiction, like, a novel, and they really have one book in them. I mean, that... well,
That is the most diplomatic way
well, Harper
of
Lee
saying that I have ever
had only one book in her until she'd been dead for a long time. Right.
Oh, where do you think AI sits, in your opinion? So we work very old school, you and I. We always have. I use it very little. I'll use it to refine something here and there, but I'm probably making way too much work for myself. But what do you use it for? Where do you see it sitting in a really productive, useful way?
88% of my use of AI is research. Not long ago, I needed to learn about barter markets in the Aztec Empire before the conquest. A professor I was working with had mentioned these, and I was like, wow, that sounds intriguing. I want to know more for another project. So I went to Chat GPT and I said, hey, what can you find me in the way of sources on this? I want articles, I want books. Chat gave me 4 of each. 2 articles, 2 books turned out to be perfect, and they were accessible online. It was fantastic.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying that, because I was going to go, wait a second, how do you know what to trust when it's this sea of misinformation?
You do not listen, you do not trust it, but if you get a data point that you think you want to trust, then you source it elsewhere. Though just today, Chat blew my mind when I was talking with Chat about different languages and their vocabularies, and it compared French, English, Portuguese from Portugal, and Portuguese from Brazil, and it wrote me almost a poem of what these languages are like and their relationships to absorbing. French is a formal garden inside a walled palace. Portuguese is the garden of a monastery that doesn't let the pilgrims in. I can't remember. It was incredible, right? And I said, is this original to you, Chat? And he goes, yeah, this is original to me. I'm like, what the fuck? I mean, it was just incredible, right?
Well,
it was great, right?
I mean,
so that was pretty phenomenal. And I said, I'm going to cite that if that's okay. And it's like, please cite it like this. And I'm like, I'll just tell me the form of citation that you prefer. And he wanted me to say I had authored it. I'm like, I didn't author it. You did, right? It's like weird. So, but with Chat and writing, I also use them.
I was going to pull you up on that. Don't worry. But you know what? You can have your personal relationship with Chat all you want.
Ideas. You chat. I'll say, I'm in this story and here's the situation as a kind of a generic. What do you make of that? And chat will give an interpretation. And it's often really shrewd. I mean, there was this one, a novel set in a country like Russia in the 1920s, but it's not Russia. And there's been a murder of a secret agent, and we're investigating that murder. Oh, and by the way, all the characters are animals. Somebody's reviving an ancient cult, okay? And I'm thinking this is like the origins of fascism. And I tell chat what I just told you without saying origins of fascism. They go, chat, what do you think about this? And chat goes, oh, this sounds like the origins of fascism. It's like, and the characters are all animals, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, chat is not thinking, right? There's no doubt chat's not thinking, but then neither are we. So what are you going to do, right? It's processing, we're processing. It's just, as a writer's tool, I'm sure if I talked to you in another 6 months, I'd have like 9 other things I'm using.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But for writers, it's mainly, and it's research, but you don't do the research. You get directed for research. You use it like the biggest card catalog in the world, right?
Yeah.
The other thing is
Very important distinction. Yeah.
translation. It's phenomenal. You see a paragraph in German, you throw it in there, the translation is way better than Google Translate. And you can ask it interpretive questions, which you can't do in Google Translate, right? You can't do any follow-up. And the cool thing is it does the translation in front of you, a word at a time, but really fast. And sometimes it stops and backs up to fix, and then it goes on again.
Yeah. So do you work differently with each client? I mean, I know that's a dumb question in the sense of course you do, because it's different personalities, but just the basic process. I guess where I'm wanting to go with it is giving everybody the sort of a broad strokes overview of what working with a personal developmental editor looks like, what to expect.
Yeah, I think I'd love to be able to say I work differently on the methodological front. I don't. I only have really about a dozen methods that I use. How I use them, how I describe them, those change. Mainly what varies is the more personal aspect of it, the soft skills part, and there I just have to learn the person pretty well, and I have to remind myself all the time, this person doesn't have your experience in receiving criticism and in rejection. I spent 10 years getting 1 million rejection letters a week. It wasn't for my books, it was for the books I submitted, but I was invested in those books. It hurt my feelings when so-and-so at Random House didn't think this book had impetus, like, fuck you. And so I have to always remember, for this person who's new to this, and almost all of them start out with me on a first book, this experience is a pretty big emotional challenge, right? Learning a new way of hearing criticism. They've had their work read before, but they haven't had it read before by people who have worked with the market, right?
Yeah. So you're talking about modulating the delivery of your feedback.
Yeah, and also the velocity. Some people are perfectly cool with 22 comments on a page, and for some, that's just absolute overwhelm. Some people can take in, 4 or 5 levels of reading. Like, that's a dangling modifier. I don't think she would say that. That doesn't sound like her to me, too. This seems just plain factually wrong, and sorry, the capital of Idaho isn't whatever, it's this, right? I don't know what, it's easy to get into overwhelm. All right. Most of the writers that I work with successfully, they're able to orient me pretty well, saying, right now, what I need you to do is sort of operate at this level. Let's look at the plot and structure of this sequence of 3 chapters. We'll worry about tone and vibe and all that stuff later. The one thing that's consistent with everybody when I'm working in narrative is I grind the axe endlessly about point of view. The only reason people still read books is there's a thing that movies can't do, and it's point of view. We can be inside somebody's mind. We can have their subjective experience. And it's not done directly. It's done through this filtration, through the narration. And it's endless in its variety. It can just do so many different things. That's what novelists actually are masters of. Point of view. You read the great contemporary novelists, and you're like, wow, they're just doing this point of view thing like so well. And so that's with everybody. And, it's a really weird thing. Most people who think they want to be novelists have never given that a minute's thought. It's like, I want to be a filmmaker, but I'm not interested in cinematography or editing. But they find out.
Yeah. I mean, and look, the work and the patience and maintaining the interest and the love for what you're doing is so important, because it does take time. I mean, the hardest part for me is I'm a very slow writer, and that old adage of I would have written you a short letter, but I didn't have time.
Yeah.
I find the distillation and being more concise just so incredibly challenging. With all the people that you've worked with, where do you see people getting tripped up the most?
Boy. Well, weirdly, it's the old showing versus telling thing in one way or another that people have trouble with. People don't notice that when they read a book they love, they watch a movie they love, there's so much they're not told. Right? I mean, an exchange I have with every writer at a certain point is, well, I have to explain da-da-da. And I go, no, you don't have to explain anything. And the last thing the reader wants is for you to explain something, right? We get that all day, every day in our lives. We want you to illustrate. We want you to demonstrate. We want you to portray, but explain, no. And there's all this info that they think they need to get in there for us, and they don't. Well, they can embed it somewhere. We can find it somewhere. We'll figure it out. And there's a wonderful line in Randall Jarrell. Wisdom, said William James, is knowing what to overlook. Right. And I am wise if that is wisdom. Right. Learning what to omit, learning what not to tell. That's a stumbling block for just about everybody. The other, for most people, is thinking that they're creating the book as they write it. Writing a book is like making a movie. You arrive on the location, on the set, with the story already fully realized in your head. And what you're doing now is putting it into the form it's going to take to go to the public. Making up the story while one's writing it, you get all tied up in knots.
The other thing too is just trusting that the web is rich and compelling and people want to get caught up in it, because when you're immersed in a beautiful story, you're watching a gorgeous film, TV show, you are filling in the white space as the reader and the viewer based on what has already been given to you, and then based on your interpretation and your personal experience intersects with it. I mean, that's what makes live performance so rich and beautiful, is that interaction between between audience
Mhm.
and performer, and you become a character and a participant in it. You do that with film and books as well, but it's obviously not that electric exchange of physical energy, kinetic energy. But I that so I guess where I'm going with it is, as I'm listening to you say that, in order for that white space to be there and to know or to trust what to omit, you have to have done that other work first, don't you? Where your character is there, the
Mhm.
world is there, the construction is there, there's compelling narrative, dialogue, etc.
Well, and it is incumbent on the creator of this, before coming to this scene or sequence or working on incidentation, to know as fully as possible everything that happens, right?
Mm.
You know, we don't need to know that this meeting convened at 2:30 p.m., but the writer needs to know that. They came from lunch. That matters, you know.
Yeah.
But it also, it builds the reality. One of the smartest comments I remember hearing from a very smart agent, Gail Hockman, in response actually to a book she'd read by Hurwitz, she said, you know, the plot of this and the characters are really terrific. What I miss is this feeling that life is going on, that people are picking up their dry cleaning, having cocktails, right? That's comes in where you think about every single piece of the reality and the flow of event and all that. The other thing, though, that's the counterpoint to that, but yet the counterpart to that, is a great thing for people to come to trust is that so much of the best stuff in their story and in their book is stuff they didn't put in there. It
Mm-hmm.
just happened in there. You know, one of the things I value so much of what I learned in college was this idea of the new critics, you know, the intentional fallacy, which is things are in literature because they're there, not because the writer put them there. And characters do things we didn't intend. But even a line can have an implication we didn't mean, right? A short sequence of events can reveal something that we never thought about, but it must be the case, right? If we can appreciate those and trust them, that's where stuff, that's weave, right? That's the very essence of the weave. And it's very strange. So many writers see things like that, and their reaction is a kind of panic, because I think their feeling seems to be, well, that got in there without me, or I wasn't in control.
Yes.
You know? And and we see this with, there's a bifurcation between those who want to see their characters do stuff that they don't anticipate, and there's those who want to keep their characters on a leash.
I mean, as I'm listening to you, I'm just thinking about when you know you're in the flow state. You know, like I guess I'm just comparing it to acting, where you know it's great writing and everything's in play, where the show runs itself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're no longer in control of it. It has a life of its own.
Yeah, well, I've certainly, you know, I've had that experience a surprising number of times, given how little I actually write. But for me, it's not quite the full thing, I believe, or it is the full thing, but it's not typical, because what I do write things that are original to me, or I'm writing them from whole cloth, but most of the writing I do is rewriting something that somebody else wrote,
Yeah.
right? And it's the weirdest thing. Getting into that flow is 9 times more likely when I'm rewriting something that somebody else wrote. And it's because when you create a set of characters in an odd circumstance and a predicament, you know, they have to find the dog that got away while they were on vacation. That is realer to me than anything I can ever invent. I just don't have the capacity to buy into my own inventions the way I will other people's. And for me, that flow, that feeling of the wave has caught the board and I'm,
Mm.
up on my feet, it's not solely the characters, but it's entirely about the characters. It's entirely my forgetting that I'm not them.
Mm.
You know? I mean, and that's why the job is so fantastic, because that's what novels do for us, right? When we really love a novel, we forget we're not the people in the novel for whatever, we forget we're on the plane. We forget, we forget
Yeah.
we're eating this terrible plain food. We don't even eat.
And we are fully invested
Yeah.
in the same way that we are invested in our own lives.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we are getting this added wonderful experience we never get with a movie, which is reading the novel. We get to direct it, cast it, design
Art
it,
direct it. Yeah.
everything. I mean, I was
Score
so
it.
bummed when I saw Game of Thrones, because now how I had pictured it was banished from my head, and mine was better, you know?
Oh, I mean, it is a glorious experience
Yeah.
when you get to be the producer, so to speak. It is really extraordinary. And for me, the test of a really great story is when years down the track, I am still wondering where those people are and what they're doing. And I've
Yeah.
got a whole idea of where the story continues.
Well,
And that's when I know someone has it's buried into my heart.
yeah, a novel that leaves us with that feeling that the life of the characters goes on,
Yeah.
right? That they've got some kind of destiny, karma up ahead of them. It's phenomenal, right? And it's wonderful for me, because I don't believe or disbelieve in karma in life, but I certainly believe in it for characters, right? I mean, a successful novel for me is one in which at a certain point I understand the characters have a destiny and I'm going along, right? I don't look at life that way, right? It's it's a different, I don't know what, different construct or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I could talk to you about this all day long. And you and I will continue our conversations privately,
Hmm.
as we do. So I always close every episode with the same question, as you know, which is, and I'll ask it within the context of this conversation that we've been having. For someone that has a dream in their heart that they want to put their story out there, but doesn't feel like they have what it takes to make it happen, what would you say to them?
Boy, I should have thought of this in advance.
No, I love that we're doing this on the fly.
Yeah. Well, what I would say to them is really a kind of a repeat of what I've said before, which is simply to write or tell or record that story in the most concise but complete form that you can, and see how you feel about it once you're able to take a few paces back and look at it. Does it feel like the story that's been inside your head? Does it have the shape of a story for you? And then you get to ask it a couple of other questions, right? Like, am I telling this for me? And that's great. I can do that and get satisfaction of it. Or do I want it to find an audience? And then ask yourself, is it a story or is it an idea for a story? Idea for a story is generally a premise, whereas the story has more than the premise, right? What every taxi driver on earth has and wants to convince you should be a novel or a movie is an idea for a story. It's not a story, right? And as we all know, the story that really speaks to us is the one that has a good ending. And if you've recorded or written your story in that short form, look at it and go, is the ending there? And if the ending's there and it works, well, that's terrific. But if the ending's not there, that's just as good too, because it's open-ended. You still got this open question. You have this thing you get to work toward. As you work toward it, don't think about it as writing. People don't go to bookstores or Amazon to acquire writing. They go to acquire experiences. Think of it as the experience. Build that experience, develop it, and then adapt and translate that experience to writing.
Thank you for how you show up in the world.
Thank you. Have a good day there.
Oh, so many takeaways. The big one, stories are fun. And they're not about words and themes. They're about experiences. It's about what moves you. And the reason to create a story is to enjoy the process of doing it, regardless of the outcome or the success. So figure out what your story is and how you want to tell it. And the match between story and storyteller, you've got to have an affinity with what you're creating. So write what sustains your interest, because that's what you're asking other people to do. And finding your voice is an experimental process. Just do it. If you have a voice, there's everything in the world to work with. I loved it when he said writing can be learned, but it can't be taught. And what is your point of view? That is why we read books. So begin by beginning. Just do it. The Thailand lesson, you don't have to understand things to do them. You understand things by doing them. I loved when he said I was getting overinvested in sharpening my pencils. I'm going to be ready to do it when. I can certainly fall into that trap. So just get your hands in the mix and the mess. Writing is a process of successive approximations. You can't understand your story fully before you write it. And your instincts are always ahead of conscious processing. So trust your gut and then verify. I loved the zero draft, talking it out into a recorder while you're in motion to keep you honest and not writerly so that it embeds it into your body and into your head. And test driving your story by telling it to a friend or a group of friends and seeing how they react. Asking if a movie unspools in their head. Does it unspool in yours? That's how you're going to know if the story rings true. And thinking about the narrative mechanics, how are you going to narrate this and not making that decision arbitrarily, because then it's a lot of work to change it later. And expanding your lexicon by reading about the topic, the setting, the place, the people, playing around with different language, using the synonym function, the thesaurus function. I loved when he said in that raft of words, there'll be something that feels right. And just writing to see what will happen. Instead of setting out to write content, just writing a scene that might never make it into the final offering, just as a process to get to know your character and letting their point of view drive things. And then having this close interaction with them helps you find out whether your character is real to you. And casting your characters with actors and picturing the dialogue performed. How do your characters talk and move? How do they arrange a sentence? And the character and plot develop together, emerging from what people do. So figuring out ways to give your character scenes and moments where they reveal who they are. Oh, I loved incidentation. That tip from Esther Shapiro that the set of incidents is a big component in getting your story to the point where it's dynamic. It's got a life and it develops a will and an internal drive. And at a certain point, your job is just to get out of the way. And that the art of storytelling is deciding what to include and what to omit. Show, don't tell. You can illustrate, demonstrate, or portray, but don't explain. Because when we read a book or watch a movie, there is so much that we're not told. We don't need a lot of information to get on board. We will figure it out and we'll get there. And the essence of the weave, I loved it when he used that language, that some of the best stuff in the story is stuff that you don't put in there. It just happened in there. Allowing your characters to do stuff that you don't anticipate, so you can catch the wave. I loved when he said, I don't have the capacity to buy into my own inventions the way I will other people's. That feeling that the wave has caught the board and I'm up on my feet is not solely the characters, but it's entirely about the characters. It's my forgetting that I'm not them. Oh, I absolutely feel that when I'm immersed in a story. So some of the other practical tips he gave, the books on writing, the Sid Field screenwriting books, they're all fantastic. The David Lodge book, The Art of Fiction. And I was particularly interested in how he's using AI, that he's using it to find sources for research and then he vets them, using it as a tool to explore ideas, and that it's a fantastic translation tool. So if you're looking for copy editing, you can first run it through AI to see what you get. And then there's lots of people that work on an hourly basis just to do simple copy edits. But if you're looking for more of a developmental editor, which is what Jess is, you can do it at several points in a project's evolution. At the concept stage, that's when you can turn your concept into a sustained statement like the zero draft. You can do it at the first stage the first draft stage, where you're like, this is what I've got. It's not perfect, but I need some help finessing it. Here's a rough idea. If you're more experienced writer, you can do edit ready text and do that. That's where you're not making changes to plot or structure. It's just going to be, cleaning things up. So what is the right fit for a developmental editor? I liked his suggestions. Talk to everybody who writes. See who they know. Look in the acknowledgements. That was a top tip for writers that you like. See who they might mention, because they always thank people. Go to writers' conferences. You can expand your network, hang out with people there. And then if you get to a literary agent stage and then publishing house, you can certainly ask for their recommendations. And you do develop continuity with your editor. When he talked about working with Greg Hurwitz on 9 books and how they didn't edit a book the same way that they had before, because you learn, you develop. That has absolutely been my experience working on 3 books with Jess and then many other projects since. And I work with him every week. We've just got a lexicon. And I really appreciated the suggestion to work on something else at the same time as your central project. So you avoid burnout and you keep things fresh and you're always happy to return to your story. That one project supports and becomes a recess for the other. And that selling stories is often about timing. So I appreciated those stories about, the backstories about selling What's Eating Gilbert Grapes, Sideways, and Outlander. That if the timing will happen, it's going to. And while you can strategize, you can't completely control it. I think the big takeaway for me from this entire conversation, there were so many, but it's that the writing process has to be fun. That, it can be agonizing, grueling, but if it's just not fun at all, then it's going to show through in the work. There's got to be joy and satisfaction and entertainment for you in the process. That if a book is not fun to write, it's not going to be fun to read. And the power of a great story, whether you're a writer or not, that stories help us understand who we are. That a great story, when we feel that the characters live off the page, that they have some kind of destiny and that we're going along for the ride and we are invested in their lives. So tell your story, whether you're a writer or not. Tell your story. I really loved that lesson in life where he talked about controlling the narrative, working on the Leon Panetta campaign, that Leon Panetta, he made himself compelling with a really good story. So whether it's at work, in a relationship, volunteering, at your church, wherever it is, whether you're a writer or not, be living in your story and believing that it's got value and sharing it. And if you're a writer, oh my goodness, what an embarrassment of riches in this episode. So I cannot wait to hear. Please leave a review, pop a note in the Facebook group, send me an email. I am so excited to hear what resonated with you from this episode.
I want to hear about your It Has to Be Me story. So head on over to ithastobeme.com/stories to share it in our free community. You can also join the conversations we're having about this episode and others. I'm Tess Masters. Join me next week and we'll dive inside another great story to help us go from dreaming to doing.